And we're back this morning with a special discussion about jobs and the economy. Joining me now, the former mayor of New Orleans. He's now the president of the National Urban League, Marc Morial. Republican governor of Ohio, John Kasich. The chairman and CEO of Honeywell, David Cote. Chief economist for Mesirow Financial, Diane Swank, and host of CNBC's strategy session, David Faber. Welcome to all of you. Governor Kasich, your 20th appearance on Meet the Press.
Is that right?
And so many of them, I was just told this, so many of them, of course, when you were House Budget Chairman, so you know about what is going on. Can you explain it to the rest of us? What is going on and how is this going to end?
You know, you always, I was budget chairman, one of the chief architects of the last time we balanced the budget in 1997. It always gets down to the end. But, David, it's a matter of will. If both sides have a will to get this done.
But do you see the will now? Is it different from how it's been?
Well, I mean, there's a little, look, it's always difficult to put a big deal together. Is the will there? I think right now they're still talking past one another. Yep. But I have to tell you, in my state, where we faced an $8 billion deficit, we wiped it out. We eliminated it. And here's the interesting thing. We have just been taken off of negative watch in the middle of this, and we also have jumped, according to CNBC, 11 places in terms of business friendly. We've been able to cut taxes, improve, reform government, and you know why? We looked it square in the eye because Ohio was dying, and we are beginning to really become business friendly. That is what they're not doing here in D.C. right now.
All right, financial implications. Let's go around the horn here, Diane. What do you see? I mean, this debate about whether we're really going to default or not default, seems like economists have been pretty clear. Don't mess with the debt ceiling.
Don't mess with the debt ceiling. But, you know, it's interesting because David and I were talking how little Wall Street is absorbing that this is a real possibility and even a probability. They're pricing in zero risk right now. But the thought that we actually might go past this idea that you could go a day or two or 3 days or 4 days, or that is just really ridiculous. You know, I was just abroad, and our foreign counterparts, economists abroad, are looking at me going, we got a real sovereign debt crisis here. Why would you deliberately give away your credit rating in the United States? Deliberately undermine yourself, cut your nose off to spite your face. When you've got time to, you can fix it now and phase in the kind of changes and not have grease.
David Cote, it appears like we're headed toward a small solution to a big problem, which is what a lot of corporate America thinks is wrong with Washington. Our politics unable to meet the challenges we face.
It's the sort of thing that scares me. Honeywell's a global company. We're $37 billion in sales, got 130,000 people, half our sales and people outside the U.S. So I travel the world a lot. And the world has changed. We went from 1 billion participants in the global economy to 4 billion over the last 20 years. Yet we still act like we did 20 years ago. And we need an American competitiveness agenda that gets our finances right, gets our energy policy, math and science education, infrastructure, and we can't even do something like this. It's very scary as a businessman.
I want to jump into talking about jobs in just a second. David Faber, I do want to ask you about this breaking story that we're talking about. This is the cover of The Week magazine, and it has Rupert Murdoch literally on the hot seat with the question, is Murdoch's media empire nearing its end? The fact that Rebecca Brooks, who is the editor of News of the World, has reportedly been arrested for corruption and some other crimes. How serious is this at this point?
Well, it's the most serious crisis that Murdoch has ever faced, certainly in his long career. There's no doubt about that. And I think the middle of last week it started to sink in for him. Prior to that, people close to Murdoch, David, tell me that he perhaps had not appreciated the depth of anger that was taking place in the UK. And perhaps for the first time in his long career, he wasn't out front of something, wasn't able to dictate the pace of events. That changed the middle of the week. You know, beginning of last week, he had his arm around Rebecca Brooks. By the end of the week, of course, she was gone. So was his longtime lieutenant, Les Hinton. The key will be the U.S. You had earlier, of course, you asked the senators about the FBI probe. Will there be subpoenas issued? One never knows what will occur if that starts to happen. And ultimately, what, if anything, is found in the U.S. will be a key for him. They are not going to be flat-footed in their response in the U.S. the same way they appear to have been in
Governor,
the UK.
you worked for Fox News. What's the impact there? What's the reaction there?
Well, you know, they have not been touched by this, they have told me, and I believe them, and we just have to see how this all unfolds. It's, you know, Murdoch's fired people. He's quoted as being told that his hands in his head in his hands, crying with the family that was impacted. I mean, it's a terrible thing, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of it, and it will change. It'll change journalism. You know, I want to go back to something David said about the inability to solve problems. I think the business community has been absent. They play politics themselves. Instead of going to politicians and saying, you fix this thing, They give money to both sides, and they have been unwilling to stand up in too many cases and say enough is enough. Look, I don't think we just have a crisis in Washington of leadership. I think it's across all the sectors. I think we see it in sports, where we let sometimes these thugs go out on the field and play on Sunday because they can score a touchdown. We see it in our pop culture. There is a crisis of leadership in America, and we are witnessing it now in politics.
All right, let me. I want to focus this a little bit. I want to get Marc Morial on this. But I want to refocus to this primary question too, because the debt fight is part of the backdrop to this still chronic problem of unemployment. Let me just show the figures, Mark, if I can. This is unemployment around the states, the unemployment figures where it is highest. Nevada over 12%, California almost 12%, Rhode Island, Florida, Michigan over 10%. Where are the jobs? Is government sufficiently focused on the question?
We have a jobs crisis in America, and I think that the debt ceiling discussion should be decoupled from the deficit discussion, and the nation needs a jobs plan. We have 14 million people out of work. The black unemployment rate is at stifling levels. It's in fact increased since the recovery has begun. And so we need a jobs plan, and we need to be very cautious and careful that a deficit cutting plan that unfairly targets vulnerable people, jobs, housing, and education program might be a cause for short-term celebration and a cause for deepening the recession, stifling the recovery. That's the hard reality, and the polling shows, my visits around the country demonstrate, that's what's in the hearts and the minds of the American people.
What's driving this persistent jobless recovery?
Well, that's the really interesting issue. One, I want to respond to the leadership issue. I've actually been involved in some of the bipartisan meetings around here. We've shown up together at meetings, and the business community, I've been warned. Be careful. It's gotten so politicized. You can't go out there. And I'm just an economist. I'm talking about the economy and talking about what's best for the economy. I'm not being political, but it's gotten so politicized. I know people who said, I won't sit at that table and be seen with those politicians.
But Diane, I want to focus for the moment. We can have a whole leadership debate, which is worthwhile, but I want to focus on where the jobs are.
I want to, no, but wait a minute here. No, there is an issue. In Norway, Sweden, and Finland, they had a financial crisis in the early 90s. They did everything right. They had consensus in government. They reformed. They went towards more market reforms. They got their fiscal house in order. The one thing that disturbs me, 20 years later, they've never hit their pre-crisis lows on unemployment. 20 years later, the rate of participation in the labor force, which is one of the things I view as a hope, throw your hat in, say you're looking for a job, is still lower than it was before the crisis, and long-term unemployment is still higher.
Robert Bryce writes this in the Wall Street Journal on Friday about what we're facing. When the Great Recession wiped out $7.8 trillion of home values, this is a former labor secretary, it crushed the nest eggs and eliminated the collateral of America's middle class. As a result, consumer spending has been decimated. We're in a vicious cycle in which job and wage losses further reduce Americans' willingness to spend, which further slows the economy. Job growth has effectively stopped. The fraction of the population now working, 58.2%, is near a 25-year low, lower than it was when the recession officially ended in June of 2009.
Yeah, all of those are frightening statistics. There's no doubt this is a consumer-led economy and has been for some time. And you've had a significant pullback by consumers on their willingness to spend, in part because of that old uncertainty. CEOs may like to use it, but consumers actually face it at home. If I don't have a job, or if I lose my job, of course, I am not going to be spending money. That being said, I'm curious, we talk about a jobs crisis now, David, but the fact is that during the Bush presidency, we had the lowest job creation numbers we ever had annually, about 3 million total jobs over those 8 years. The question really is, has there been a seminal change in the ability of the U.S. economy to create jobs? That certainly is something that a lot of people are starting to believe. You heard David Cody talking about these larger issues of competitiveness. Much of that goes back to that. But we haven't created a lot of jobs for a very, very long time, not just the last year.
Why? What's happening?
Well, right now the problem that we've got is uncertainty of demand. Businesses don't add until they're sure that there's somebody's going to want to actually buy something. To that, I would add, we've added uncertainty of regulation. And when you combine those two, it just causes businesses to say, I'm going to wait a little bit.
But you
and I
guys
always
always
find
sit
it
back,
interesting
David,
when I
and
hear
wait,
government
you know.
say, we need to create jobs. And I say, no, actually, government doesn't create jobs. Government can create an environment where jobs can be created. And I think it's important to start to distinguish between them.
David, here, let me just say one thing about David.
If it's growing 6 to 8%, the economy, it would be a no-brainer. We would be generating jobs, and the uncertainty would be erased.
Believe it or not, consumer spending is up over the last 8 months. Okay?
I know that.
Here's the problem. This man doesn't know what's coming, whether it's regulation, whether it's taxes, and this high debt presupposes you're going to have higher taxes. He can't make a decision about investment when the roof's about to cave in. He needs certainty. That's what we're trying to do in Ohio.
I'm glad you raised the issue of demand, because I think there's a lot of politics in uncertainty about taxes, uncertainty about regulation. The bottom line is there's not enough demand in the economy. So if you have a job, you're concerned about being laid off. Look at state and local government, where you've had a plethora of layoffs over the last 8 months. If there are further budget cuts from the federal government in those areas, you're going to have more layoffs, and the private sector is not poised because of demand to pick that up. We need a jobs plan in this country. If as much time was devoted to a consensus jobs plan as the country's devoting to a consensus deficit reduction plan,
but I'm not sure.
Fact,
but Governor, what does that actually mean? Because that's the question of what is it? I asked the Treasury Secretary last week, does the president have to acknowledge, look, there's things we've done, there's things the Fed can do, but we can only do so much as the government. That's a sad political truth.
When a business, and I've been in business for 10 years before I got this governor's job, when a business is uncertain about the future, they sit on the sidelines. We have so much money on the sidelines waiting to be invested, but they're uncertain about where we're going to go. The answer: get this god-darn deficit under control. Do not raise taxes on capital gains, risk-taking. Provide incentives for investment. Real changes in education to connect our kids with real job opportunities. And, if you begin to and lay down some certainty on regulatory reform, he'll be investing.
Well, you know what? He's got $3 billion, right? Over $3 billion in cash in your balance sheet, don't you? It's probably gone up. That was last quarter, so it's probably gone up. It's not yours, obviously. It's your shareholders. But you're choosing, what'd you spend, $800 million on capital expenditures this year? All right, could have been more, could be a lot more, right? But, I hear this uncertainty about regulation, and frankly, I think a lot of CEOs say it because why not? Why not get some regulatory relief if you can, or tax relief? But at the end of the day, your first answer, demand, it would seem to me is the key.
It's uncertainty and demand.
Yeah,
but can we just unpack that a little bit? Because this idea that the consumer being king, that debt is really the issue. There's government debt, there's personal debt, people that deleveraging, the fancy term of basically getting out from under your debt, paying your debt down, means you're not spending, you're not creating demand. Businesses, it seems to me, Diane, are actually making a decision, which is we're just going to get leaner and meaner.
Yeah,
the jobs aren't coming back.
Well, many of the jobs aren't coming back, but the jobs that do come back are ones that we never expect. The fact that we're in a renaissance in the manufacturing sector. It's a lack of imagination. I do think the one silver lining here, and is part of the reason we haven't generated jobs, is because if coming out of a financial crisis like you do, this is the nature of it. You don't get enough growth and enough demand. That said, where's the silver lining? We've had more IPOs since the fourth quarter of 2010 than we've had since 2000. Why is that important? New businesses, not just small businesses, new businesses interacting with established firms is where you get the miracle in job creation. That was what was happened in the 1990s, to an extreme. Companies that never should have hired, and there may be some bubbles out there. We can all talk about some of them.
Should have been able to raise capital.
Right, and they did, and that may be happening today.
I mean, if you want a good news story, take a look at Groupon, for example, and name some of your viewers may know. 7,000 employees have been hired over the last couple of years. Google, for example, one of the only 10 years old, 28,600 employees, 2,400 employees added over the last quarter. There is still growth in this economy.
What this conversation shows is that Wall Street is back, the business community's come back, but Main Street and Back Street lag behind.
Right.
And it may point to the fact that these are structural shifts in the American economy. Yes. We have to focus on competitiveness, yes, but producing things so that when we spend money in this country, it creates jobs in this country. So we need a larger plan.
We also need need training in real world. Vouchers for companies so that they can train for things that they need. In Ohio, because we faced our $8 billion budget deficit and provide tax relief, what's happened? CNBC says we've jumped 11 points into 11 places in terms of business friendly. The credit agencies say your credit. We have taken you off negative watch. When you provide certainty to people, then they're able to respond to it. And what we're seeing in Ohio are positive things. If they did it in Washington, we'd be better.